All right. And then let me get the share screen up. Y'all let me know if y'all can see the share screen when I pull it up.
We see it.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
Good, good. Good morning, everybody. To those on here now and to those who will watch this later on YouTube. Today's lesson is the book of Daniel, the Lion's Den. And I forgot which video this is, but we've been doing a series on Daniel. So I think is this four, maybe five. But this is the next lesson in the series of the Book of Daniel Explained. So we're going to talk about the Lion's Den, and I want to kind of break down this situation and some of the things that are happening. So whenever you read it again, you'll have a better understanding of what's going on in the Book of Daniel and what can and a lesson we can extract from it. So to start off with, kind of a review. Last week we talked about the writing on the wall. We did a lesson on how Belshazzar was ruling Babylon at this time, and he's not actually the king from the Persian records, but he is the ruler. He's ruling in his father's place, so he's pretty much king, ruling as king during the time, but he's not actually officially the king. And we explained that last time during the writing on the wall, even though the Bible refers to him as king. But Belteshazzar, he sees the writing on the wall, and it's a message from God. And Daniel explains the message how Belteshazzar did not maintain God's rules and how he was lifted up in pride and how he was disrespectful towards God and how God gave his kingdom was going to give his kingdom up to someone else. And and Daniel explains that to Belshazzar. He says the kingdom is going to be given to somebody else. Your days are numbered, and that is exactly what happens. So when we get to chapter 6, we're in chapter 6 now. The person who takes over the Babylonian Empire is the King Cyrus, or as he known historically, Cyrus the Great. Now Cyrus takes over Babylon, and we know that from the Bible and also from other sources, the Persian records and other records outside the Bible, that Cyrus rules over Babylon. However, when you read the Bible, the person that's mentioned that Daniel was dealing with in this chapter is a person named Darius the Mede, and the Persian records don't mention him. So the only source we have about Darius the Mede is in the Bible, and that name doesn't appear anywhere. So some people are try to say the story of Daniel isn't true because of that, or they try to they're like that's kind of a contradiction, or it's not correct. However, there is a couple of possibilities why Darius the Mede shows up, even though we know Cyrus the Great is ruling over this empire. Uh, there's quite a few theories, but the most likely theory is that Darius the Mede is actually a general under Cyrus, and he's ruling the city of Babylon under Cyrus. And actually, that's consistent with what we know historically, because Cyrus does, according to the records, he does appoint somebody over Babylon to rule over Babylon. So a lot of people theorize that Darius the Mede is actually, it could be a title for this general, but it's probably a general who is ruling over Babylon in the name of Cyrus the Great. That's the most likely, and the Bible kind of alludes to this. If we read Daniel 6:28, just to skip to the end of the chapter, it reads, "So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." So the book is alluding to Daniel's ruling under both these people. So and Darius is not Cyrus's father, because we know Cyrus's father is somebody else. So more than likely, Darius the Mede is somebody ruling Babylon under Cyrus. But it doesn't really matter for our purposes. But just to, if anybody tries to say it's inconsistent, that's just to let y'all know. That's why his name appears and doesn't appear anywhere else. But let's go to the plot. Daniel chapter 6, verse 1 through 5. And I'm reading from the NIV version. It reads, It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule over the kingdom, and with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel was distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So what's happening in this situation is Darius, and probably he's probably not the king. He's probably a general under Cyrus, but he's effectively ruling as king over Babylon. And he appoints a lot of government officials, and he gets Daniel. Daniel was at one point seems to be retired, and he pulls him out of retirement and says, you're gonna help me rule over these people. And he puts Daniel in a very high position, and people for whatever reason, are jealous of him. Maybe they want his position. Maybe they don't like him because of he's ascended from the Jews. Like, we don't know the reason, but they are plotting against him, and they try to find corruption, something they could bring charges against him in his official duties, and saying, like, this person's corrupt or this person has done that or whatnot. But they can't find anything because Daniel is living uh, clean and they can't find any corruption. So they're like, the only way we're gonna get him has to do something with his faith because they know he's a man of faith, and they're like, we'll have to get something along that basis. So they go to the king to suggest something, or the high general, however you want to consider him in this context. Verse 6. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repelled. So King Darius put the decree in writing. So they convinced him to make a law, and it is a law that requires, for a certain period of time, you cannot worship any god at your own pleasure. You have to go through the king. You have to worship essentially the king, or extend your worship towards the king. And they knew that this would get Daniel in trouble because Daniel is a person who is faithful to God, somebody that prays continually to God. And they knew this law would, mess up. So that's why they, had this edict. Now, what's interesting about this is, generally speaking, historically, from what we know about the Persians were very religiously tolerant, right? They're people that they didn't really disrupt a lot of the cultures of the people they ruled over. And that's how they were very effective of, keeping control of their empire, and they were able to grow because they were actually a little bit more lenient towards people having their own customs and things like that. So a lot of people, try to look at this. They're like, that doesn't make sense. Why would they make an edict like that, restricting religion when they're known for not restricting people's religion? That's kind of one of the things they're known for. But on the surface, it doesn't make sense. But when you really think about it, it actually does make sense that they would put this kind of edict in place. Uh, and the reason why, these are the reasons I think why the edict actually does make sense, why they would do this. First, is that the edict was only for 30 days. This is not something that was long term. It was only something, for 30 days. And a lot of people probably, religious or not, in that time, they would be like, okay, I just don't worship my God for 30 days, and then after that I can continue. And that's the thinking of a lot of people. They'll be like, okay, it's just temporary. So they may ignore it for a while. The edict still allowed you to keep your gods because remember the Persians are not trying to necessarily stop you completely from worshiping your gods or saying you have to worship the gods of the Persian. They are just simply saying you can't pray to them for a certain amount of time. And finally, it gave the king control over your worship. So what I think is happening here is that the Persians, they don't really care what gods you worship, but the Persians do care about keeping control over you. They want to make sure, you know, your worship, you still respect the state or their gods are still superior to your gods. You still have to submit to Persian authority. And and for us today, I think that's something we also got to keep in mind because a lot of people that want to control you or they may not necessarily flat out deny religion, but they try to control the way you practice, right? They put limits on what you can do. They'll say yeah you can go to church here, but at the same time, if you do something that disrespects what I believe, then you got to be silent. They'll cancel you. It's kind of like one thing I can think of today is we deal with a lot of ideology about homosexuality. That's something that's very big in today's society. If you go worship, go to church, a person that supports homosexuality may not say anything, right? But when you go outside and preach and say, "Oh, okay, homosexuality is a sin," or you need to change your ways, then they'll be like, "Oh, hold up, you can't tell me how to live my life," or no, you can't preach that, Eh, And I think the Persians are doing the same thing. They're not, even though they're not outright destroying somebody's religion, they still want to keep control of how you practice your religion, and it's a method of to make sure that you're still loyal to the Persian gods. You're still loyal to the state, and this is something. If you remember our last lessons, Nebuchadnezzar was doing right. Nebuchadnezzar wanted the people to bow to his god. Uh, Daniel friends said no. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said no, we're not going to do that. And Nebuchadnezzar said, if I put you in the furnace, who's going to save you? Because he didn't care that they worshiped another god, but he did care that they didn't respect him as the overall ruler. And I think that is what's happening in this situation, and that's why the edict was put into place. They want to control, but this presents a problem for Daniel. Let's go to Daniel chapter 6, verse 10 through 14. Oh, sorry, I had to step away right quick. I was getting hot in here, so I had to put on my fan. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10 through 14. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God just as he has done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lions, except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repelled. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. So Daniel hears about this decree that you can't pray to God. And Daniel still does it anyway. Now, I don't think Daniel in a sense is trying to necessarily go against the king because he is a servant of the king and he likes the king. But from what we can gather from the Bible, he has a good relationship with the king, and the king tries to save him. But Daniel ultimately is a servant of God. Daniel does not let anybody disrupt his continuous relationship with God. The fact that it was a short period of time, that it was only 30 days, most people would have said, I can go 30 days without worshiping, my God or my gods or whatever. But Daniel he says, no, it doesn't matter if it's a minute or if it's 30 days or a year. Daniel is a person is always in connection with God. He's a person that's continually praying to God, and he's not going to let any decree stop him from doing what God would want him to do. And you see this throughout Daniel's whole life. When we go back to when he's first brought to the Babylonian court, he says, the king gave them food, and Daniel said, he said, I can't defile myself with this food. He says, I'm gonna have to eat, a certain diet because that would go against God. Daniel, they don't think he was there at the time, but when the king Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue and forced everybody to bow to it. I don't think Daniel was there at the time, but his friends were there, and his friends said, "No, we're not going to bow to your statue because we, worship God." And you see that Daniel is very consistent in his faith, and he's not going to let any decree keep him from his continuous relationship with God. And one of the things we need to take from this in the modern day is that we can't allow disruption in our faith for a minute, for a month, for a year. We can't allow disruption in our faith. If we go to Romans, I'll put them out of order. First Thessalonians chapter 5. It reads, verse 17. It reads, "Pray continually." Continually. If you read some versions, it will say, "Pray without ceasing." That means never stop. Always pray. If we go to Romans chapter 16, verse 17 through 18. I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them, for such people are not serving Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people. So one of the things we have to be careful of is false teachers make you inconsistent with your faith. They don't always outright try to say, "Oh no, you can't worship God," or they don't necessarily outright, try to contradict your faith. They usually slip in. They're very sneaky, right? They usually try to make you inconsistent with your faith. They will take little pieces away from what you should be doing. And the situation that Daniel's dealing with, these people, this decree, it's not outright destroying faith. It's only temporary. It's only for 30 days, but it's throwing a disruption in Daniel's faith. It's saying like, for a certain time period, you can't worship God. And that's a problem. And that's something we got to be careful of us. We need to be careful of in today's time because people will try to take little pieces away from your faith, and that's how they start to get you. And they will try to make you prioritize things of the world versus priorities, making priority things of God. Sorry, I cannot speak today. I'm off. Forgive me this morning. But that's what they do. They take little pieces. They make you inconsistent with your faith. And Daniel, who's a man of faith, he cannot be inconsistent. He won't allow that to be. He's going to be consistent with worshiping God. Now, Daniel is, if we read the rest of the story, the people that are trying to go against him, they tell on him, and they put him in prison, put him in chains, and ultimately the king has to throw him down into the lion's den. He doesn't really politically, he's kind of tied up. He made a edict he shouldn't have made, but he makes the edict, and now he can't change go on his word. The Bible constantly says the law of the Medes and Persians, like their laws can't be changed, or it's very difficult to change. So, it's something that can be altered. So Daniel has to be thrown into the lion's den. Now, Darius, he doesn't want to do that. He cares for Daniel, and he says in Daniel chapter 6, verse 16, and I have it here on the screen. He says this: So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. And see, Darius recognizes that Daniel was always worshiping God. He says, the person you serve continually, he says, you never let anything disrupt your faith. He says, may he rescue you. So Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, and when it says lion's den, it's probably not like a natural situation like some people would say, like, is it like a cave? It's probably not a cave. It's probably an actual uh, place where they kept the lions. The kings of those times in that area were known to keep lions and to hunt them for sport or to kind of help their fame. So it's probably a actual some kind of cage that they would have kept the lions. Probably not like a natural formation, not a cave or anything like that. It's probably a place where they kept the lions for sport. But Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, and this disturbs the king. It disturbs Darius because he didn't want to do that. And Darius, if you read the whole chapter, we're not going to read it for time's sake. He can't sleep, and he wakes up early the next morning, and he calls out to Daniel to see if Daniel is still alive, if Daniel's God has saved him. And the answer, of course, is that Daniel is unharmed. And Daniel responds to him. He says, May the king live forever. He says, My God has shut the mouths of the lions. So he's in the lion's den, but none of the lions have harmed him. And he survives this ordeal. Of course, the king, after Daniel is saved, the king gets Daniel's enemies. I can't remember if he threw them in the lion's den instead. I know they're executed. I have to reread it, but he gets rid of Daniel's enemies, them and their families. Is very brutal, and he makes a new edict declaring, God, Daniel's God, the God is, the God. He said nobody can talk anything about Daniel's God. And what I think this also represents when we talk about Daniel being put in the lion's den, Daniel is in many ways is he's surrounded by lions, not just physically, but also people in his court. Daniel is, you have to remember, is he's a political figure, right? He's somebody high in the government. He's somebody that is a leader, somebody that he's an administrator, but he has a lot of people against him. However, because he never allowed anybody to disrupt his faith, he was always worshiping God continually. Uh, the lions, the people that would try to eat him, people that would try to destroy him, God shut their mouths. And I think for us today, what we can take from the book of Daniel is that when we are in constant communication with God, when we're staying with God continually, when we're consistent in our faith in God, then God will also shut the lion's mouth against us. He will shut their mouths and stop you from being destroyed or being consumed by just wicked people or the wicked ways of this world. And that's why it's important that we can't follow the edict that, these type of edicts that was made. You can't follow the edict that says, okay, you just stop worshiping God for a time period, just for 30 days. You can't give those kind of concessions to those type of things, because in order to be saved from from the lions, it has to be continuous. And Daniel shows that him being consistent, him praying continually, him following God's law continually, that is what saved him from the lions. And if we want to be saved from wicked people, we have to do the same thing. We have to be very consistent in our faith and not allow anybody to put a disruption in our faith. But that's all I had. A pretty short lesson, but I think impactful. Is there any questions or any comments anybody would want to make about this story? All right. Well, we will end it there.